Well, hello, friends. It is time for Between Two Sundays. Mark Beresford is joining me from Canberra. I am joining him from Kingsthorpe in Queensland, and we are looking at each other. And through the wonders of technology, we can share the next little bit of time talking Bible stuff.
Can't wait.
You, you turned up. It's got to, it's got to be a given.
Gonna be
Uh,
great.
For those of you who don't know the show, Between Two Sundays is the show where we discuss the readings for the coming Sunday between the Sundays that we would read those readings. And at the start of the show, we discuss the readings from the Sunday just gone and how we've lived out of them. And then we discuss the readings of the Sunday to come, how we're thinking into them as we approach Sunday. And for those of you who preach or teach on these readings, you might find this useful. You may even want to let us know your own thoughts on the readings. Please do so. Drop us an email at betweentwosundays@gmail.com. That's a number 2, or comment if you're watching on YouTube down below, or comment if you're listening on Spotify, or if there's another way you can do it on some of the other bits, I don't know. But let us know, get in touch and tell us what you thought of the readings, because we'd love to hear from you. But last week, Mark, what have you carried out of the readings from last Sunday?
Yeah, really tempted to go with some of the stuff in the Genesis account around Joseph being betrayed by his brothers. But what really stood out to me is from the Matthew text here. We have the disciples ending up witnessing Jesus walking on the water in the midst of this storm. And Peter, of course, gets out of the boat. And as he sinks, Jesus pulls him in and calls him little faith. I love that phrase. It's only really found in the Gospel of Matthew, and it's found a few key times, not a lot, but enough for it to feel like a bit of a rhythm throughout the Gospel. And I've interpreted it as little faith. A lot of translations will say ye of little faith, or you of little faith. I think it's almost a nickname. But what it really does throughout the Gospel of Matthew is it carries this theme, importantly, that the disciples are beginning this journey of faith. So they're considered at the beginning of this sojourn with Jesus, where they're learning what it looks like to live by faith. I think that's really important for the Gospel of Matthew, partly because, we still hear of people reading through the Sermon on the Mount and say this is for the hyper-spiritual and not me. Yet it seems to me that throughout the Gospel of Matthew, the author is going out of his way to make sure we know that this is a message for those who are beginning this journey.
Yeah.
And I love that, Peter can do a crazy thing like jump out of the boat in an attempt to work out what faith is like. And Jesus, even though that looks extraordinary, Jesus can say, essentially, you can grow from here.
Yeah.
Not we're stuck in this disaster that, you don't have the faith to walk on water, but rather love that you're giving this a go. That's what starting out in faith is like. In fact, there's something in me that sees a very close parallel between Jesus reaching down into the water and pulling Peter up again, and just a good dad teaching a son or daughter what it is to walk. It seems so much like a good father dealing with an infant. And this little faith, I think, is encouragement rather than discouragement. And there is a way to sort of understand this little nickname that sees it as just a reminder that you can grow from here. It often comes up in these little moments of failure throughout the gospel, but I find it, it rings to me like a term of endearment rather than a rebuke. And I get sad when I hear people hearing it as a rebuke. I think we've lost something there. And it should be an encouragement to us as we read through this gospel, thinking, all these big asks that Jesus invites us to take on. Really, these are just the start of something that will grow big, a mustard seed that will grow impossibly big beyond our wildest imaginations. And I think this is exactly what's happening for the disciples here in this little story, especially for Peter.
Yeah, it's interesting because little faith was the thing that I carried away with me too, but for slightly different reasons. So, that whole "why did you doubt" is pretty pertinent for me, because the "why did you doubt," obviously Peter didn't doubt Jesus, which means that the person that Peter doubted was himself.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And because Jesus said, "Come out on the water." So Jesus knows he can do it. And yet when Peter, when Jesus says, "Why did you doubt?" I don't think he's saying, "Why did you doubt me, Peter?" He's saying, "Peter, why did you doubt yourself?" What's interesting about the little faith is that, and again, like yourself, and, you always hear people saying about, if you have, bigger faith, you'll be able to do things like this. Obviously, Peter's getting chastised for having little faith. I think it's Jesus pointing out that, hey, little faith, yet you walked on water.
Yeah.
I challenge anybody who's ever read this story and preached it as, you've got to have bigger faith than Peter before you can walk on water. Peter walked on water. He did. And he got far enough away from the boat that when he started to sink, he thought, this is bad. Now, Peter's a fisherman. He's been on the water before. No doubt he's fallen in the water before. No doubt he probably knows how to get himself back to the boat. He's far enough away from the boat and the water's churning enough that he can't handle it. And so he walked from the boat on the water, which is more than as a kid, I remember trying to do this at my uncle's pool and failing time and time and time again, obviously. And yet little faith got Peter far enough away from the boat that he's panicking. And so that little faith was a reminder to me that, and again, coming up quite often in the Gospels, but going back to the parables we talked about the other week, faith the size of a mustard seed. If you just have a little bit of faith, you have enough to walk on water. Just don't doubt yourself. So I'm chewing on that quite a bit and thinking about what that might mean for me. So that's last week's readings. This week we are into the 12th Sunday after Pentecost. And this week the readings are Genesis 45 verses 1 to 15, Psalm 133, Romans 11 verses 1 to 2a, then 29 to 32, Matthew 15 verses 10, basically 10 to 28, although verses 10 to 20 are optional, but we will be discussing them because we like that. Read the whole dang thing. That's our motto. Shall we make our way through from Genesis as we have been?
I think that's a good idea, actually, in this particular scenario. The psalm really looks like, before anyone's put pen to paper on this particular psalm, they've been reading the passage from Genesis.
Go for it. You kick us off. Kick us off, Mark. Go.
So Genesis 45, here we have, this has been quite a long story, taking over, a number of chapters in Genesis, perhaps a little bit less than half of Genesis is taken up with the story of Joseph. And, Joseph getting rejected sold and disappearing. From the point of view of the family, this is a sad chapter that's over, I suppose, by now. Yet we followed through Genesis the story of Joseph, and he has ended up not dead, but powerful and in a space where now he has the capacity to choose whether he saves or doesn't his family, who have chosen not to save him. I think there's a really pertinent moment where Joseph is, I think, deeply moved, not just by his brothers being in his presence or by hearing of their suffering during this famine. I wonder if he's genuinely moved by the way this story has unfolded. If he's so surprised that God has brought him here, and now as he looks at his brothers, I think the story falls into place for him. And of course, he says this: God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. What an extraordinary moment of faith, and I would suggest realization for Joseph that that all the things that seem to have gone so disastrously wrong, and you'd be really stretching this story to say God made all this happen. God changed the attitude of his brothers so that they would, condemn him and try and kill him. I think this really is a story that's unfolded in a way that Joseph in this moment can see very clearly that something good has come out of bad, and can actually turn to God and praise God in that space. So here we have this, brothers dwelling in unity by the end of this psalm, and it's just anything but what's expected, anything but what probably none of us, as we've read through this story, have been imagining that it's going to get here unless we've read it before. But if you're reading this with fresh eyes, this is, I think, an extraordinary moment. It is, of course, also a moment of forgiveness, where Joseph finds the capacity not to hold the grudge, and perhaps even more than that, to trust again. So we've seen in the couple of chapters just before this, Joseph kind of hiding and, wanting his brothers to be here, wanting them to go, wanting to show himself and wanting to hide at the same time. And I think this is this beautiful moment where he comes to trust again. The one who all these bad things have been done against comes to trust not only God, but also his brothers. And so you get this psalm that talks about the brothers dwelling in unity once again.
Yeah, I think the choice here is incredibly important, because he could easily just turn around and go 11 times, and except maybe Benjamin, he'd skip Benjamin, but just knock all the rest of them off.
He's got all the power, doesn't he?
He does. He's got, and this is the thing. And for all the talk of, this is how God moved things so that it could get them into Egypt and then get them out of Egypt so we can have the Exodus. It's kind of like, right, so God's going to get the whole nation to move into Egypt so they can be made slaves. That's a great idea. Rock and roll. That's a loving God, isn't it? No. This is a story about choice. And the verse that you actually plucked out there is the hinge verse here, where he says that where's it gone now? God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth. there's a famine going on. And right now, Joseph has the power to tell all his brothers, or either lock them up and throw away the key, or goodbye, go away, go back home and starve, or no, you're all coming back here. The family's all coming back here, and we're going to hang here, and everything will be hunky dory. And it does end with everything will be hunky dory,
Yeah.
except generations on, times have changed. So that's what's happened there. And so it's understanding that right now Joseph has a choice in which history could change. And in fact, it probably does change.
Yes.
Which reminds us, or should remind us, of the fact that every decision we make has an impact somehow. And this is why we should always choose the good, because we don't want to live with regret. We don't want to live with pain. Having said that, there is sometimes pain in choosing good, but that's the sort of pain you do want to live with, because you feel better about it. And the psalm, as you say, rightly points to this: brethren dwelling in unity, and the image of the oil. So much oil running down the beard. This is the unity that comes when God's Spirit is so over the priest that they are enjoined as one. This is the unity with which the psalmist wants us to see we have with one another. And by putting this psalm side by side with Genesis 45, we're literally talking about tribes. We're literally talking, because by the time obviously the psalmist is writing, I mean, he's talking about Aaron's beard and anointing priests. So this is obviously well and truly after this story of Joseph. But the very fact that he's talking about this and there's tribal groups by this time resonates back to this moment when the tribe of Joseph, albeit there's just him at that point in time, and all of his brothers, some of whom have some kids, some of whom have none, this is a time for them to come together in unity for the preservation of a community, a tribe, a group. And so this is really, side by side, a real indicator to us of the fact that we, being put here on this planet, don't live in isolation. We're not islands unto ourselves, and neither are our tribal groups. So this is not just talking about individuals. The Genesis story is talking about the 12 individuals, and yet the psalmist is trying to get us to see that no, this is about tribal groups also seeking the unity where they understand they are so interconnected that it's like the anointing of the priests, the joining of the Spirit of God with the high priest in the temple. And this is what Jesus alludes to in John chapter 17 in that prayer, where he prays that, we will know that we are one, just as he and the Father are one, and we are one in him, and he in us, and us in God, and God in us, and he in him. We are one. This is the core of love your neighbor as they are you, because they are you. So this is a real unifying couple of passages that really should help us see the importance of maintaining connectedness with all of humanity, not just the people within our own tribes, or even tribes which might be interconnected, but with all people.
Yeah. Mark, I'm wondering if holding these two Genesis, the Joseph story in Genesis and Psalm 133, if holding them together reminds us that this unity is hard won, that this is not an easy space to end up in a world where the wrong thing is done, in a world where, people will betray and life will not automatically turn out the way we expect or dream.
Right.
I wonder if holding these two together kind of reminds us that it's a pretty radical kind of forgiveness that can lead to this kind of unity.
Yeah.
That there's plenty that fights against this, and really we need to be people who are at least working in this direction. I love the fact, as I said before, that Joseph seems to have to work on his response to his brothers, even finding the courage to reveal himself to them.
Yeah, which doesn't happen straight away.
No, it doesn't. It takes a while. And I sense this is not Joseph just wanting to be a pain in the butt to his brothers. I think he's kind of sorting out, how on earth am I going to respond to this? This is the last thing I expected to unfold in this story.
Absolutely.
There's no way. I mean, he hasn't sent for them. They've just kind of turned up in front of him. And I think it really does take a process for him to get to the point where he says, I think God's done this, and I'm gonna work with that reality rather than the reality of any anger or frustration or loss that's mine as a result of the actions of his brothers.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a fight for this unity. By the time we hold these two together, this is not an easy one unity. It's been a real struggle, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And what's interesting is that not only does Paul kick off in the readings here, referring to his connection to one of those tribes, the tribe of Benjamin. He uses that as a way of understanding that there is still this interconnectedness in God. I don't think any, I was reflecting on this in the lead up to us chatting today, and I'm thinking, how can anybody read this and think that God rejected Israel? You can't, that there is no, I mean, Paul makes it very clear. Has God rejected his people? No. And I'm one of them, a member of the tribe of Benjamin. God's not rejected those people. If there's anything that says our Jewish brothers and sisters are in with God, irrespective of the Jesus connection or not, this is it. You want to take Paul at Paul's word? This is Paul saying Israelites still connected to God very clearly. Because the gifts and calling of God.
Yeah, keep going. Sorry, mate.
Because the gifts and calling of God are irrevocable, right? But then what's really cool is he talks about this connectedness that comes even when we have stepped over the line into disobedience, which harkens back to the story. You got, the 10 brothers throwing Joseph down the pit. Yeah. And yet here at the end, this, Joseph is exhibiting the true character of God in saying, well, you might have thrown me in a pit and rejected me, but I'm accepting you back. Yeah. And by the way, you don't have to do anything. There's no need to pay recompense. There's no need to pay any. I'm just accepting you back. Why? Because I'm a gracious, loving, in Joseph's case, brother. Paul's talking here about God's graciousness in doing the same thing for us.
I'm really liking Paul's repeated use of mercy here. For me, that's kind of the key of why he's entering into this conversation, is that he wants to take the opportunity to say that, to say it again, because I think he says this earlier in his letter to the Romans. He really wants to emphasize that this is not a people who are born into privilege. This is not a people who have religiously earned their way to God. This is just another one of the people on the earth, or the tribes on the earth, as you have said before, who need the mercy of God, who need grace. The Romans, I think, is, he tries, especially at the beginning there, it's a great equalizer. He's trying to put everyone on the same page. Everyone is indebted to God, and God is merciful on all. So I think there's something in this repetition of mercy that is actually pointing to the key of why Paul enters into this conversation around Israel.
Yeah, absolutely. That was quick.
We haven't done the gospel yet.
We haven't done the gospel yet, and I love this gospel. This is one of my favorite readings, particularly the second half. And I know it's filled with mystery, and a lot of people get upset because they think Jesus is calling this woman a dog.
Yes.
But there's something much deeper going on here. He's not calling her a dog. He's basically referring to the way that the people with whom she's connected are talked about by.
Yeah.
I mean, this would be the equivalent of calling out people who have some sort of racial slur for people that we know by using the racial slur in conversation with them. I remember someone preaching about this once and saying, every time I read this story, I suspect this woman and Jesus looking at each other, and I can see the woman saying lines to him and winking at Jesus, going, "Are you going to play along here or not?" And Jesus winking back and saying the stuff back.
Yeah.
They're having this conversation, not necessarily for each other,
Yes.
but for the people that are around them listening.
Yes.
And so,
yeah, and it's a really good point. That I love, and when you say the people around him listening, I find myself thinking the disciples clearly are here. They've probably used this language, with no Gentiles around, in the safety of just being among people who think the same way as me. They've used this kind of derogatory language, and here is Jesus exposing it, really.
Yeah.
But then, of course, there's one imagines that there are people around from the Gentile world who are hearing this language and end up seeing a miracle.
That's exactly right.
So it
and
goes
what's interesting
both
about
ways.
that miracle is coming back to Matthew's little faith theme.
Yes.
It happens on a crumb.
Yes.
Yes. And this woman is literally demonstrating to those who are around watching and listening, including all the disciples who would have been on that boat, including Peter, who stepped out of that boat. Here is a woman who's saying, all I need is a crumb.
Yeah.
I don't need, all I need is a crumb. That's all that's required, which is why Jesus says, great is your faith.
Yes.
Because the little faith is enough faith.
Yes.
And I think it's an incredibly powerful story if read carefully. And I've heard some people say, oh gosh, this reading's coming up this week. What on earth am I going to say? How am I going to defend? You don't have to defend. Look at what the story is about. And what's interesting is that, in calling her a dog, and now, look, there is another way to view this story. Let's be honest. But Jesus does call her a dog, but then she just says, okay, well, I'll be a dog, but just give me a crumb. That's all dogs need. Dogs need crumbs. To which Jesus turns around and goes, you got me there. That's brilliant. I mean, literally, that's what he's saying to her.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Jesus answered her, woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for as you wish. And she gets a miracle. If you want, Jesus is put in his place, if you want to read it that way.
Yeah, there's a way to read it that way.
As well. Well, that's right. But even if you do it the other way, Jesus is put in his place, but he still says, he still stands corrected. So there's a great humility, if you want to read it that way, that's exhibited by Jesus too. But I think the first way for me
elevates, that lifts her up.
Yeah.
That makes her the great theologian in this.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And for me, though, I really like this interplay between the two, as if Jesus is saying, play along with me here. Because I want to make sure that the people around me understand what's going on. And it's interesting that this follows directly after Jesus has told this parable about, or this example,
it is referred to as a parable here.
Parable, yeah, it is. Where he says, what comes out of the heart is the thing that will lift you up and pull you down, not what you put into your mouth.
Yes.
What can have out of the mouth, not out of the mouth, because I love the way that the NRC said, do you not see that whatever goes into the mouth enters the stomach and goes out into the sewer? I love that. What goes in your mouth is irrelevant.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
what comes out of your mouth that matters. And instantly, straight after that, they go to another place, they have this interaction with this woman, and she simply says, the crumb is all I need.
Yeah.
I don't need the best seat. I don't need the highlights. I don't need the big bit. Just give me a crumb and my daughter will be fine.
Mm.
What comes out of her mouth has changed everything.
Yeah.
And I think it's just a beautiful, beautiful story that, as I say, give it some good reflection and you'll see more than Jesus slandering a woman.
Yeah. What comes out of her mouth is what reveals her faith here. So I can see the wisdom in holding these two. I mean, Matthew obviously writes them next to one another. So there's good reason to hold these two accounts together.
Yep.
But I think there is a way to hold them together and say, it's what comes out of who you are that reveals the heart. And here, in the most unlikely person in some people's assessment of who is likely to be in and who is likely to be out, it's out of this one that comes a demonstration of such great faith that almost seems to stump Jesus.
Yeah.
There's something wonderful about holding these two together. So it slightly disappoints me that the first little bit is in brackets, because I think it actually informs this wonderful story of Jesus' encounter with this Gentile woman. And
read it all.
Mm.
Is what we would say.
Yep.
Are we done?
I'm happy to keep talking if you want to.
Do we have anything else to say?
I think there's enough for us to chew on for a week.
I think so. But what was that great preacher preaching who said once, if you've struck oil, stop boring.
Yes.
And I think we've struck some good oil tonight.
I think it's a wise little thing. Sometimes less is more.
Sometimes less is more.
As Jesus, one who points to the crumb, just might say.
Little faith.
Yes.
Little faith. We have been talking which one was it? The 12th Sunday after Pentecost, Genesis 45 verses 1 to 15, Psalm 133, Romans 11 verses 1 to 2, and then 29 to 32, and Matthew 15 verses 10 to 28. Read it all. If you want to jump on and share with us some of the stuff that you're thinking as you read these passages, between two Sundays, that's a number 2 at gmail.com is probably the best way to do that. And we would love to share your insights and thoughts with our listeners at the beginning of next week's show. You can always jump on and connect with Mark at barefootfollower.life, his website, or you can jump onto Instagram at monkindocs and you can chat with me there. We'd love to see you. Let us know what you think. And we want to glean your wisdom and what you're seeing and what you're hearing. And we've had some great responses over the last couple of weeks from a number of people, which we've shared on the show, and we'd love to see more of that. But that's it, my friend. That was short, sharp, and shiny tonight.
We got through.
We got through. And thank you for joining us, folks. There's a whole bunch of people out there going, oh, thank goodness they're finished. We hope you'll join us again next week for a possibly not as short, but hopefully just as insightful edition of Between Two Sundays. Until then, it's bye from me.
See you later.
Cheers.